It's good to have you back, Ryan. Of course, it's the same day for us. It'll have been multiple weeks for all of you. Same day for us. So, real quick, what are we going to do today? Or this episode? Oh, yeah. This will set the internet on fire. This is going to break the internet. Okay. All right, we'll roll the intro, and then we'll break the internet. Hi, everyone. Once again, I'm Jack Russell with the Naval Institute Press, and I'm, of course, joined by Ryan Szimanski again. This is the Portholes podcast, and this is going to be episode 4. We are once again sponsored by the Naval Institute Press. Use code PORTHOLES to receive 25% off your next book purchase. So, Ryan, this is the big episode. Mm-hmm. Maybe not big, like that big, but this is the one that I've been wanting to do to ruffle all the feathers, as I like to, as we talked about before, by calling the Iowas overrated. Now we're going to call them something else. If you've seen the Alaska video, we've already talked about battlecruisers, large cruisers, and the idea that battlecruisers don't really exist in World War II, at least not by their traditional definition. When our mutual friend, Drakenafel, did his Alaska video, which was last year now at this point, he posed a question at the very end, which says, if Montana gets built, Iowa is more of a battlecruiser to the U.S. Navy than Alaska is. And of course, that set the internet on fire. I woke up the next morning and he put it in the video. I then posed the question on Twitter on the USNI, on the NIP page. And then I was like, okay, this should be fun. I woke up the next morning with hundreds of notifications, like the whole world had imploded. Drac and like a bunch of his friends, were up like all night, like just having a go at all these people. And, and there's probably, I can hear them in the comments right now, just slaughtering me for even, thinking that, we're posing this question. But what do you think, Ryan?
I think the U.S. Navy called them battleships.
Yes.
And
that's it.
That's what they are.
Okay, episode over. We're done. Okay. Obviously not. I get it. Yes, they are battleships. And that's what everyone in the comments and everyone said. And we get it. They are. Right? We have history to back it up. But these are the same people who are also still calling Alaska battlecruisers. Despite everything we've already talked about, everything online, everything in the books, every other content creator calling them large cruisers, right?
Yeah, let's get some consistency, people.
So I think it's fair that we can have this conversation. So if we apply the traditional battlecruiser definition to Iowa in a world where Montana exists, so just suspend reality here for a second that the Navy has called Iowa, or the Iowa's battleships. Could they be called battlecruisers?
Well, let's go over our traditional definition again. The battlecruiser design is usually less well armored than the contemporary battleship.
Check.
Absolutely. It is usually a higher speed and features the same type of gun.
Check.
However, that gun is usually in one fewer turret or one less barrel per turret.
Extra check. 3 turrets instead of 4.
Exactly, exactly. So far, it doesn't look good. The battle cruisers and battleships are usually direct contemporaries. So often designed and built right alongside each other in the same year or couple of years period.
Also true of this. If things didn't change, then that would have been true.
Yeah, we'll probably end up coming back and debating that some.
Okay.
But certainly as it starts, you've got a fast battleship and a slow battleship variant that are being designed simultaneously. Now, one big thing is the battle cruiser concept is
dead and buried, or no?
It's usually the same weight, give or take a couple thousand tons, as its contemporary battleship design.
Which Iowa is not. Montana is heavier.
The early designs where the two designs actually parallel each other are like that. But as it actually ends up, the Iowas are built and the Montana design process sort of stops. And then once the Iowas are completed, their design process stops and the the Montana process picks up again, and it continues like it is a generation further on as opposed to a contemporary.
Fair enough.
So that is my big point where this box isn't checked. Now, we go back and we say that, all right, the Navy authorizes 2 Iowas and 2 of the early 45,000-ton Montana designs. That really does check all the boxes, though I don't like it. I'm trying to think of a way to say that that's not...
No, it's interesting. It's very interesting. And I had never once even thought about this until Drek, he made that statement in that video. And it's something to really, really think about. And had Montana, Ohio been built, how would they have replaced, well, and not replaced, but how would they be used, let's just say a continued Pacific War, where all these ships are now in the same theater, what's the use case, right? How is, Montana, now of course you could say, well, if holding everything else equal, but maybe, well, it doesn't matter, Iowa or Montana, you're all just sitting off the coast of Japan shelling anything that moves, assuming that everything else goes the same way, except the Montanas aren't canceled and we don't drop the atomic bomb. I'm just trying to get to a point where the war is still on, but Montana and Ohio potentially, or maybe just Montana, have been completed and the ships are in the same theater at the same time.
My real question is, what would be the use of the Iowas at this point? Because the Iowas do a lot of the jobs that they do because they are the largest battleship in the inventory at that point. Well, if the Montana has taken that,
what's the point?
Yeah, what are the Iowas doing? Because now the Iowas are used as fleet flagships. Cool. Montana has even more space than the Iowas did. So
yeah, Montana is a physically larger ship. It fixes a lot of the issues that we talked about previously, where we're size limited, and Montana, while it has sort of like a long bow too, it's not nearly as long, and it doesn't nearly go to a point as the Iowas do. So now they're not flagships, and they're the new. And you made a point before about, well, it's the newest. I don't know.
They've got the greatest reserve of buoyancy, which means more room for upgrades decades down the line. They've got more firepower for shore bombardment. They've got more anti-aircraft protection for escorting carriers. They do everything that the Iowas do, just one step better, one generation better.
But they are slower.
I don't think that the Iowa's greatest quality is their speed. That's certainly what the Navy designed them for. But again, they were just supposed to be the fast wing of a battle line where you have a 27-knot main line and a 33 knot fast squadron that can help turn an engagement.
But isn't that what a battlecruiser is? Like, if you look at Jutland, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the slow battle line you're referring to is like in this case, the Montana class.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the fast group, which is the battlecruiser Iowas that are now, if they're steaming ahead to meet a somewhat weaker enemy, like a bunch of cruisers perhaps, or even other sort of fast enemy battleships or battlecruisers themselves, then, I mean, Montana's certainly more of a match to Yamato than Iowa is. So you're kind of walking into this one.
No, the Iowas were designed to do traditional battle cruiser duties. They were supposed to hunt down the Congo class, which the U.S. had no counter for. They were supposed to get into the backfields and hunt Japanese convoys and sink Japanese heavy cruisers and protect our carriers from their heavy cruisers and form the fast wing of the battle line. But I don't believe just because they were doing the traditional role of battle cruisers that makes them a battle cruiser. Because I still hold that battle cruisers have ceased to exist and no new ones are completed in the 30s and 40s. And if you want more of an explanation for that, go back and listen to our earlier videos. So the battle cruiser concept has fully, realistically, the battle cruiser concept has evolved into the aircraft carrier. The battleship concept has evolved into the fast battleship. And that is the role that the Iowas are filling. And as the fastest of the fast battleships, they are taking over that traditional role by design, because the folks who are making these designs are the ones who fought World War I, and they're projecting that onto the future. Now, as it actually turns out in the future, that's not how naval warfare is fought. The Iowas don't do a single thing that their concept is designed to do. And
just like Yamato doesn't, and had Montana been built, it wouldn't have done anything either. That's in a very expensive shore bombardment piece, which is why I guess they kind of like the older battleships too. As long as they don't have to fight in a fleet engagement, they can go stumble across the ocean, post up outside an island, and their guns work in the same way the newer ships' guns work. So, yeah, that's very true. Obviously, like as you mentioned, we've already sort of established that the idea of the battle cruiser by World War II is already done, and as we've evolved onto new types and new classes, it's just really interesting to think about how having Montana out on the field could challenge that very thinking. That's what about you think about the Japanese. So the Japanese skip a lot of generations of battleship, right? So they go from Nagato, and they have, and then, you're supposed to have a bunch of battle cruisers, Tosa class battleships, and then there's various sort of intermediate classes that then combine.
Yeah, the Keys and the number 13s.
Yeah, into Japan's first fast battleships. So on paper, they have sort of the same progression that the U.S. Navy does, where the two sort of come together. And especially once you get to Key and everything else, then it's I've got a pretty well sorted fast battleship. It could be more heavily armed armored. I mean, 10 16-inch guns is pretty decent. But then they just skip all of that and go right to Yamato.
And there are some intermediary designs in there. Was it Fujimoto and starts with an H? I can't remember his name right now. But they basically designed the Japanese versions of the South Dakota class, your 35,000-ton treaty battleship. So there are some designs that fill in this missing gap, and those designs do look. They are starting to look like Yamato on a smaller scale.
Mm-hmm. I guess my overall point is Yamato to me represents like the standard battleship. So Yamato is not a 30-knot ship.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, by World War I standards, Yamato is a fast battleship. It is not a fast battleship. It is a slow battleship. I mean,
ooh, okay. What would you define fast battleship as?
30 knots.
Okay.
And above.
Interesting.
It's why the Navy didn't retain North Carolina or any of the South Dakotas after the war. These are ships that are relatively new, and they're just, nope, I don't want to play with you anymore. You know.
I would argue that it's because they didn't have as much room for growth and accommodations and stuff as the Iowas, and not so much the Iowa's speed.
That is also a very true and fair point, but by 1945, it's can you keep up with the carriers? And Washington, South Dakotas cannot keep up with the carriers, or not the new carriers either. We're also kind of looking towards the future, and then that spawns that whole design study about, and this is actually really interesting. There's a whole design study done on the South Dakotas. The Navy knows the South Dakotas are these weird, ugly ducklings. Like they're squat, short, and they're really deep,
cramped.
It's pretty bad. But we just built 4 of these ships, and they're relatively new, and they have decent guns. I mean, it's still the firepower is good.
I'd argue they're the best treaty battleships built,
and I don't disagree.
I think that anything completed. They are better than anything completed except the Iowas and the Yamatos.
But they're still not Iowa fast. And by 1945, they're not Midway fast. Or any projected carrier in the future.
I'm not sure that the carrier battle groups are actually operating at 33 knots.
Not yet, at least. We have seen, there have been instances where the carriers have outrun their battleship support, though. That happened during the war. I mean, Enterprise is famous for, putting the throttle on and leaving North Carolina behind her. So there has to be some truth to this, because the Navy did launch a study at the end of the war to make make South Dakota ships faster. And they came up with 2 ways of doing it.
Okay.
One of the ways was to delete turret 3.
Well, for roughly every 1,000 tons you get rid of, you get a quarter knot more speed. So that's removing about 2,000 tons. So you get a half a knot of speed.
So their idea was to delete turret 3, like delete its barbette, like delete as much as they could.
Okay.
In the hopes of potentially adding more machinery in that space.
Okay.
I don't know how you achieve that given the ship as built. So that then led to Design Study 2.
Okay.
This is really interesting. If you're a World of Warships player, South Dakota Speed Improvement Plan Design Study 2 is represented as USS Georgia. Which I don't expect you to know. If you're, and maybe I'll put a picture online, or maybe I'll do an insert or something. If you look at the model, and which is really strange because even in game, they call this an Iowa hull. It's not.
Okay.
Not in any person can look at this and see that it's a South Dakota class battleship. And I dug this out of a Garsky and Doolin book, so I'm not saying they're absolutely correct, but they're more correct than others. So they the Navy goes, we're going to cut the ship in half. Not really half, but maybe like the back 40%. We're going to cut it off. Then we're going to add a whole second set, multiple frames right there in the center, and add more machinery that way. And you're going to keep you're going to keep your turret 3 because they said we can't lose the third turret because the ships can't have 6 guns because that's pointless. We've talked about that.
Yeah.
And so in the game, if you look right behind the first funnel, all the way to the bow, it's Massachusetts. It's a South Dakota class battleship. Then there's a huge gap in the center, right, with some AA mounts like you would expect to find on an Iowa class battleship. Then a second funnel.
Okay.
And then the stern section, including turret 3 of a South Dakota class battleship. And you can tell because there's a huge separation in the secondary battery. It's literally just where on a South Dakota you count, turret, mount 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. Well, right between when you get to the third mount on whatever side you're looking at, and between the fourth and the fifth, they cut and add in machinery. So you have 2 turrets, 2 mounts back here, and 3 up here with this huge gap in the center. And that by adding a certain amount more machinery, and again, they didn't really spend too much time on this, right? But by adding the machinery spaces, they could increase the shaft horsepower, and then by adding length, that helped make up for the goofy, draft and everything else that the ship had. So in their mind, they had achieved a way of taking a battleship and fixing it.
Just how fast were they trying to go? 33 knots like in Iowa?
They were trying to match at least Iowa's speed.
So did they remove the original power plant and use this extra space to drop in a whole new power plant, or are they just like dropping in new boilers to send more steam to the existing turbines?
Something along those lines. I'm not sure if they're removing I'm not sure if they're changing out turbines or if it's just adding boilers or it's most of this is just speculation.
Are they also lengthening the bow to add just more length to beam ratio or is it?
Of course, and there's nothing mentioned there. And then the model that Wargaming did in the game is, like I said, it's a South Dakota class battleship with the middle extended. It gives you Iowa vibes because you get the 2 funnels.
Yeah.
Right? But when you look at everything else, it's a South Dakota class battleship. Where were we going with this? Oh, yeah. So, but that was immediately like, this is dumb. Yeah. Like,
buy a new battleship for that.
Exactly. So, that was immediately written off just as fast as taking out turret 3 and re-engineering the whole stern section. And then they put all those ships to bed pretty quickly. So then you're left with all these really, really fast battleships, the Iowas. Keep up with the ever-quickening battle groups of the Cold War period.
My definition of fast battleship is anything 24 knots and above, with 23 knots and below being your older slow type.
But is that by like World War I? Again, like, we're used to when we look at World War I, you're used to, you're all these slow battleships. Again, Yamato is a quick battleship. I'm not a ship of that size with that kind of displacement that goes almost 30 knots. That's impressive. I'm just not saying it's, it's a slow, fast battleship.
Yeah, I would say that 27, 28 knots is enough to keep up with the carriers most of the time. And sure, you get into some situations, like maybe enemy battleships are coming for you and you got to haul tail and run. Well, cool. And it doesn't matter at that point if your battleships are too slow to keep up and are between you and the enemy. And likewise, an enemy strike is coming and you want your carriers to haul tail and run so they're not found by that strike. Well, cool. That enemy strike now finds your battleships, which probably have the combat air patrol from your carrier, have heavy anti-aircraft firepower and heavy armor to absorb hits, and you just blunt that attack before it gets to your more vulnerable ships. I don't see that as a huge issue.
Well, right. So we got a little bit off topic.
Not us.
Nah. I think just the point is that I think Montana is more along. I view it as the standard type. Of the fast battleships, I see Montana as the standard type battleship.
The type that will form the battle line.
The type that forms the core of the battle line. And I view Yamato like that as well.
Okay.
It's just the difference is that Japan just skipped all the fast battleships and just went for big because that's what they could afford to do. And then the Iowas then form the sort of battle cruiser division that you would see and that you did see in like the naval wars of the past, certainly in World War One. Again, we've already argued that by World War II, battle cruisers don't exist. But the question is still interesting to think about as far as, we've gone through every box. I mean, like they check every box. And when Drac did his video too, it's not like he said the Iowas are battle cruisers. He didn't say that. It was just a bit of fun to get people thinking, and ultimately that's what this is about. So I still hear people in the comments like chewing me out right now, about this, but it's just a bit of fun. That's all.
So here's one for you. We resurrect the term battle cruiser to talk about the Kirovs, missile armed ships that don't check any of the traditional boxes that you would see checked in 1909 when Indy comes online or whatever. So we obviously do repurpose this term for new ships. What do you think a World War II battle cruiser would look like, assuming we repurpose this term for something in that time period?
Okay, so
we're throwing away the old World War I definition, and so what design would you say is required?
So you're saying I can't apply the idea, the established idea of a battle cruiser to a ship in World War II?
Right, but you're still using the term. So what would...
Well, I think... So, okay, hold on. I think you can apply battle cruiser to, like, the big Russian surface units today because they aren't battleships. They're definitely cruisers. And they possess battleship-like firepower. Of course, missiles have replaced main battery guns. So I think that's why you can apply the term battle cruiser to those ships. If I had to go back and design a World War II battle cruiser, I would come up with something that looked like the O class and be done with it. Or again, I would end up with a ship that looked like Iowa. It would probably be more O class than Iowa.
Okay, so it still matches the traditional World War I definition.
Yeah, just because if you're talking, the difference between World War II and World War I in reality isn't as great as it is between World War II and today.
Oh God, the life of dreadnought battleships is 1906 to 1946, essentially. Those are the years in which new dreadnoughts are commissioned. So you've got just a 40-year, a 2-generation time period. And you're putting 2 world wars in there with just 1 generation in between them.
Exactly. So that's why I feel like I can't really come up. I couldn't really come up with anything that's really that unique. Again, if I really had to stop and put time to it, I would end up with something that looked like the O class. And maybe that's just cheating. I'm not very imaginative, but I think that's probably what it would come out to be. But then again, you have to then compare it to the battleships of the period. I think, unfortunately, you can't get away from that. You have to compare. And then that's how you end up with these smaller, lighter armed ships, potentially.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of any instances of a battle cruiser design coming out without a contemporary battleship design to compare it against.
Well, we had talked back in the Alaska video about like Kronstadt that the Russians were building.
Mm-hmm.
This was very much a battle cruiser, where it was much more than a large cruiser, and it was much less than a period battleship.
It is being built contemporaneously to the Soviet Soyuz.
Yes, the Sovietsky Soyuz is on the blocks, and it's being finalized. So the Russians have a quote unquote contemporary battleship design, but
this looks nothing like that.
But this looks nothing like that, and and that ship is laid down and is progressed way further than the actual battleship, and they weren't laid down that way either. It's not like the Brits where, okay, we have a battlecruiser class and a battleship class, let's build them at the same time. That's not so. In my mind, Kronstadt's a good example of a battle cruiser ship, like a ship that is a battle cruiser that was built like singular focus without necessarily a complementing contemporary battleship next to it. And of course, neither were built, so whatever. But that's an interesting example in sort of my mind. Then also the Japanese, Congo. I made this point in one of the last videos, where to the British who built those ships, that's a battle cruiser.
Mm-hmm.
But to the Japanese, it's a battleship because it's the heaviest unit. It's one of the heaviest units that they had acquired, or the most modern.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So to the Japanese, this is our battleship. This is our it's the greatest. It's to the British. It's that was Tuesday. Like whatever.
We've just reskinned Tiger.
Yeah, that's all we've done. And so to the Navy in question, is this a battle cruiser? Is this a battleship? The Congo is a battle cruiser. I mean, it's just that's the specifications that it was sort of built around, roughly when it was built, especially when you compare it to British battleships. Mm-hmm. But again, to the Japanese, that's a full fleet, battleship. Of course, later on they wise up to that and reclassify them. So I think when it comes to sort of the gray areas like that, and this is then you can apply this to the same Iowa argument. To the United States Navy, the Iowas are battleships, as you pointed out.
Mm-hmm.
To the Japanese, to the commanders of Yamato staring across the ocean at Iowa, they might not, that's a large capital, that's a large unit, but they're probably thinking, weren't they supposed to have like a Montana? Like, isn't there a much larger ship that's supposed to be out here somewhere? It might be the same way, like how Admiral Lee looked at Kirishima that night. Like that's a 14-inch gun battleship, battle cruiser. I will dispatch it with my 16-inch gunfire. Oh, that's a cute Iowa. I will now dispatch it with my 18-inch gunfire. Obviously, the Iowas are battleships. Please don't hold it against me. I just, for the sake of conversation, I wanted to bring that up. That's all.
It's fun talking through it and what makes them so and why there is this parallel or enough of a parallel that is debatable.
Yeah, and I promise we will leave battle cruisers alone for a while. We've used that word a lot over the last couple episodes, and I'm getting really sick of it.
I will make no such promises. I love battle cruisers.
No, it's just a lot of fun. They represent this really strange gray area, like between battle cruisers, large cruisers, the World War I holdouts. It's such an interesting group of ships that it's fun. And again, when Drac posed that question about if Montana's built, how do you? It's just set the internet on fire to where I was like, wow. It's like there's some really passionate people here. And of course, history is history. I can't argue. I mean, that's what they are. But could you see redesignating, the Iowa class, CC 1, 2, 3, 4?
They'd pick up with the old numbering, so it would be CC 7, 8, 9, 10.
Would they?
I think so.
Really? Even though those ships were never, like, they were changed, like, even before they were launched
I feel like
or commissioned, like,
because they were authorized, and there's all this documentation that says that CC1 is Lexington, CC2 is Constellation.
okay. So why is Montana and Ohio 67 and 68 instead of, because Illinois, Montana and Ohio are supposed to be 65 and 66, and then we authorize 2 more Iowas, so then in reality they should be 67 and 68, but instead we now move Montana down a notch. I mean, right?
That is true. The Montana design study starts as the BB-65 study, and then it transitions into 67. It's interesting. The other time we see this, you've got your core group of Connecticut-class battleships, and then you build Mississippi and Idaho, and then you build your final Connecticut-class New Hampshire, and the numbering goes like that. Your first was 4 or 5 Connecticut's, and then your 2 Mississippi, Idaho, and then New Hampshire. So it really should be Montana 65, New Hampshire 66, was Ohio 67, Louisiana, New Hampshire, and then Louisiana, and then it should be Illinois and Kentucky at 70 and 71.
All the way down the line.
Yeah.
So
who do we know at the Navy who can fix this?
Yeah, I don't know. They don't listen. They don't like to listen.
I'm gonna call my congressman.
They all do their yeah. Good luck with that. Yeah, they all do. They just seem to do what they want. You know.
There isn't as much internal consistency, especially with naming conventions of ships.
Right. We'll have to do an episode, of course, later on about how submarines have become the heavy units of the modern Navy, being able. So we talked about the Russian modern battle cruisers. Where missiles have become sort of the main battery guns of the past. So, is a submarine with its torpedoes and its cruise missiles. The fact that the Navy's naming convention gives state names to submarines. Obviously, someone made the decision that should be the case. So now the Navy accepts. So somewhere along the line, they accepted the fact that the submarine is the main fleet unit or capital heavy hitter. I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah, they go from cities to states. And then a couple of old traditional names thrown in there too,
because every once in a while, because tradition.
Yeah. And then a couple of people names every now and again, and
the same thing with carriers.
Yeah.
I wish they would take a break from whatever it is, from presidents and people, and I think we need to get back to Lexington and Saratoga.
I'm a big fan of the traditional names. I would much prefer to see the traditional names reverted to.
Yeah. At least we are getting a new Enterprise.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all those down there in Norfolk work faster. But anyway, before, we keep burning the internet down, I think I'm going to call this episode here. A little shorter on this one, but, I just had to say it. So thanks for bearing with me, Ryan. I appreciate it. And as always, this episode is sponsored by the U.S. Naval Institute. Use code Portholes for 25% off your next book order. Thanks, everyone, for watching. We'll see you next time.